I am very happy to welcome you to the first interview with one of the members of Aurealis Therapeutics Scientific Advisory Board, David Armstrong. David Armstrong is professor of surgery, and among others, he also is co-director of the USC Limb Preservation Program, director of the Southwestern Academic Limb Salvage Alliance, and Keck School of Medicine at University of Southern California. David, you have founded the American Limb Preservation Society. Could you please share with us what are the society's main goals and achievements?
So the American Limb Preservation Society was sort of formed because out of a really big need. I mean, if you were, what we know right now is that for the amputations that occur now every 20 seconds around the world, and by the way, that's increasing, not decreasing. One of the things that really can reduce, and in some cases even eliminate preventable amputations, is putting together a team. And when you marry those teams with technology, you can really make a difference. But the goal of ALPS was to serve in a way kind of as both a dating app and a marriage counselor for putting those teams together. It's to put women and men together that care about the problem, that are dedicated to limb preservation, not only in the United States, but really around the world, because that's what it takes. It takes a team, I think, technology and tenacity.
Absolutely. This is extremely important, creating spaces so that people who care for a specific cause can come together, meet each other, form teams, so that with the help of technology, new solutions can be created. Of course, in this case, we are talking about limb preservation, and this is one of our driving forces at Aurealis Therapeutics. And so, David, we are extremely proud that you are part of our scientific advisory board, and we would love to hear your thoughts about our gene therapy, AUP-16, especially in regards with what do you think that our therapy can bring to the treatment of diabetic foot ulcers and chronic wounds?
Yeah, well, I think one of the things that we know now about looking after the diabetic foot is that this is a really complicated problem. I mean, the overall idea of preventing amputations, healing wounds, is quite simple, but the implementation is complex. I think one of the things that may be promising about Aurealis is that it is a platform technology that in its own kind of idea is initially quite simple, but could also be scaled up in terms of its complexity and could be really, really flexible to try to constantly be, moving toward healing in this patient population, to create a bacterial factory, if you will, is to me just an awesome and subversive kind of idea in this area. Instead of fighting these bacteria, we can work with them, and I think that is a much more humble and less hubristic way forward to look after these really complicated wounds and try to help heal them and hopefully reduce preventable amputation.
Exactly. Avoid fighting the bacteria and instead leverage its nature to create technology that can support healing chronic wounds and thus reduce the number of preventable amputations. And now that we're talking about this, I think it would be very important for people to understand what is the real impact and burden that diabetic foot ulcers have on the patients and on the society. Could you please share your thoughts on this?
Well, let's start with kind of just looking at the clock right now. So in every second now, someone with diabetes around the world develops a diabetic foot ulcer. About half of those ulcers will get infected. Once that happens, there's about a 20% chance each infection that you're going to end up in hospital. And that's why now there's an amputation every 20 seconds around the world. And what we would like to say is that time's up for this problem because the burden is so extraordinary. Right now, the we did a study a couple of years ago that looked at the World Health Organization's global burden of disease, and diabetes by itself, or diabetes is a top 10 condition. But if you remove just the leg, just the diabetic foot from diabetes, the diabetic foot by itself is a top 10 World Health Organization global burden of disease condition. And on top of that, this problem has tremendous morbidity and mortality, and yet we just ignore it, but because it's often silent, and that's why it's so sinister. What we see is that after someone develops a wound, that moment that happens, there's about a 2.5-fold greater risk of them dying that year than if they didn't have the wound. If they develop an amputation, especially a high-level amputation, their mortality at 5 years is worse than all but the worst forms of cancer. And this problem now is more expensive in the United States, in Health Canada, in parts of the EU, in the National Health Service in England, than the 5 most expensive cancers. And so what we know is that right now, as we're talking, there are plenty of people talking about breast cancer and colon cancer and lung cancer, and they should be. But we, right now, we happy few, are the only people talking about this silent and sinister syndrome. And I think there's a lot we can do if we come together to make a difference here.
That is so true. And in order to amplify our understanding of this burden, could you please now share with us, David, why has this been increasing over time?
So what we're seeing now is, thank goodness people in general are living longer. And it's better than the alternative, God knows, but they are living longer with non-communicable diseases. So we see diabetes as one of these big non-communicable diseases, just like heart disease and cancer and lung disease. But diabetes is one of these big 3 of those. And within that problem, and within diabetes, more and more people are getting better and better glucose control, thank goodness, around the world, in the developed and in the developing world. But as they're living longer with these complications, they're developing these complications of diabetes. And first and foremost there are diabetic foot ulcers. And those are increasing in every part of the world now. And that's true of low and middle income countries just as much as in wealthy countries. So this is not a disease of wealthy people. Actually, it's quite the opposite. It affects people of limited means much more so. And that's true in developed countries as well as middle and low income countries as well.
And that just reinforces the importance of having people, teams, and organizations looking for a solution. And to wrap up this interview, David, you often compare cancer with diabetic foot ulcers. Could you please dive a little bit deeper into why is that?
Yeah, sure. I don't think it's fair to compare one terrible thing to another. But the fact is, again, that there are a lot of people right now talking about cancer and trying to treat cancer, and there are cancer moonshots in terms of research and development. But there are no such moonshots for the lowly foot at the end of the body in diabetes. And again, it's no one's fault. It's just that it's largely been ignored. But let's just compare these two things again. What we see right now is that the diabetic foot is as expensive as the 5 most expensive cancers in the United States, in Canada, in the EU, in the National Health Service, which is extraordinary just by itself. In addition to that, mortality is at least as bad as a bad form of cancer with people with diabetic foot ulcers, with Charcot arthropathy, with diabetic foot infections, and certainly those people that develop high-level amputations. And so then after that problem, this is the one thing that takes them from being active and productive and puts them often forever on the dole. In addition to that, after people heal wounds, they're not healed because 40% will recur in 1 year, about 2/3 at 3 years, and 3/4 at 5 years. So if the foot in diabetes is a little bit like cancer in terms of its cost and its complexity and morbidity and mortality, then maybe when people are healed, maybe they're not really healed, maybe they're in remission. And so this seems like we're just playing with words, but that concept of remission is really, really powerful, because now what it means is this is a problem that these patients and who are like our family often are going to be living with. And so having really good quality therapies that can get those patients healed and as rapidly as possible once they get that wound is really important to maximize, if you will, their ulcer-free days, their hospital-free days, and their activity-rich days.
Thank you so much for sharing this with us, David. I think that this comparison is so important because it allows us to understand the relevance of this problem, that once the diabetic foot ulcer is treated, it does not mean that it's just gone forever. There is a risk that it could reappear down the road. And this also just reinforces the importance of having effective, efficient treatments that can provide patients with a fast solution and ultimately through that improve their quality of lives.
I agree 100%.
I love that. Well, thank you very much for being with us today, David. And with this, we conclude our first interview with one of the members of Aurealis Therapeutics Scientific Advisory Board. I hope you liked this video. If you have done so, please remember to click on the like button, and we will see you on the next interview.